Well, in a very interesting thread from Ford Fisher, who is a great journalist, if you guys don't follow him, goes around in videos a lot of, I guess, just civil unrest and protests and things, and has to keep himself sort of neutral as possible because he needs to stay on good terms with both the left and the right in order to cover all of the various left or right fringe events that go on, particularly out west, like with Antifa and the Proud Boys. And so he posted a screenshot of this new declassified report from the Biden administration, which details the focus of the new war on terror that I've been talking about for a while now, because we all know that the war on the Muzzies is long over. The war on terror, on Islamic terrorists and Al Qaeda and all that, those were Bush and Obama isms, and now that we're in the Trump-Biden era, that's all changed. That's gone away. And so the focus now is on purely domestic terrorists, not international terrorists, not even internationally inspired domestic terrorists. These are purely homegrown Americans with, American-centric ideologies, which is to say that these are dissidents, people who dissent from the established state, who do not like the established state, who would seek to overthrow the established state. And I have to give the Biden administration credit because, at least in writing, they are going after all dissidents, not just, left or right or, any particular ideology. It's not just, Proud Boys and Patriots that they're going after. It's not just Antifa. It's not even just, Ron Paul supporters, which used to be a thing back in the Bush-Obama years when they would talk about domestic, potential non-Islamic domestic terrorists. It was always Ron Paul supporters that they seemed to be worried about, which is funny because I thought Ron Paul didn't have a lot of support. He didn't win the Republican primary. Why would his supporters be, such a threat? But now, they put out they cast a pretty wide net with this thing. And to summarize it, they said pretty much anybody who cares about abortion one way or another, whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, whether you think that the government is too strict on restricting abortion or whether you think that it is not strict enough, you're a problem because, you're dissatisfied with the status quo, because the status quo is we have this sort of mix to where abortion is somewhat restricted depending on where you are in the country, but it's also not completely banned. And so whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, you have something to be upset about, and that's not a good thing. You should never be upset at the state. The other thing they have in here, which is pretty obvious, racial or ethnic extremists. These are people who, needless to say, fall into, I would think, any racial supremacist category. They do not specifically just say white supremacists here, although in practice, I would imagine that all that they're going to go after would be white supremacists. I think that there's far too many black supremacists in this country for the feds to effectively target them. It would be way too difficult. They're everywhere. Black supremacy is a fairly mainstream ideology, and so they just don't have the resources nor the will to infiltrate those sorts of groups. White supremacy, however, is about as extinct as it can get. There might still be one or two floating around out there, but they don't really exist. And so that means that the FBI has, enough resources to effectively, infiltrate those groups to the point to where there are more white supremacists in this country, probably are undercover FBI agents than there are genuine white supremacists. Very similar phenomenon in Germany, where the German intelligence agencies had all infiltrated a neo-Nazi party in Germany and tried to, arrest them all. And then they realized that they were just arresting each other, and they were all from different government agencies, and there weren't actually any neo-Nazis. The whole thing was a ploy by various intelligence agencies who didn't realize that they were working with other spooks. Actually, I should back up for a bit, because before I get through the rest of these, and geez, I'm already over 5 minutes. Before I get through the rest of all these groups that the federal government is going to be targeting as extremists who need to be persecuted, I will say that I think that this report is getting a little more hate than it deserves, in that they're not just saying that all of these groups need to be, just because you believe these things, you're a criminal. That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is that they are concerned with stopping people who have these beliefs and also will commit crimes. Now, of course, if that were the case, they could just say, we're concerned about people who commit crimes. So when they specifically bring in the ideology of whoever the potential criminals are, that tells you that they are going to go after, in some way, people who believe these things before they commit crimes. Because I think that the FBI at least claims that their goal is to prevent crime, not just, scrape the guts off the sidewalk after people have already been killed. In reality, however, as I went over a couple days ago when I was talking about January the 6th, what the FBI does is, in fact, instigate ideological extremists who they consider to be potential domestic terrorists into committing actual acts of terror that they otherwise would have never even considered or had the resources to do. And so when the feds say that they are going to try and target these sorts of groups to make sure that they don't commit violent acts of extremism, you should take that to mean the exact opposite. That, in fact, you should expect to start seeing these groups supposedly committing more and more crimes and acts of terrorism as a result of the FBI targeting them. Now, of course, this is where I think people should find cause for concern. If one of the things on this list, which I'm going to finish going over in a minute, if that includes you, you shouldn't fear that, I'm under threat of imminently being arrested by the secret police, which that's what the FBI are, and they're going to rendition me off to a gulag to be tortured. That's not the case, because they do make it clear in this report, hey, we're not going to prosecute people for constitutionally protected free speech, or just engaging in wrongthink, which I guess is good, because that's one thing we get to do in America that you don't get to do in places like Canada, which are totalitarian states. But what it does mean is that the feds will do everything they can to put you away, to put you in jail, and so that means trying to entrap you in some sort of illegal activity, or getting you to threaten to commit some kind of illegal activity. And so that means that feds will try and infiltrate your groups. They'll try and get into your your online social networks, and I don't mean like Twitter social. I mean like sub networks, your network of friends. They will want to embed themselves in your groups. They'll want to ingratiate themselves and act like, hey, I'm one of you. And so it's a good thing that this list came out, because at least now we know who they're targeting, and you can, and I would have been certain already without seeing this list that, I would be the kind of person that they would want to target and try and get me to commit some kind of act of terror. I just happen to be a good person, and I don't want to blow up buildings, so their entrapment scheme hopefully would fail against me unless they engaged in some Jedi mind tricks that I don't know how to combat. So with that said, let's move on to the rest of the groups that are being targeted. So far, we've gone over abortion activists, both pro-life and pro-choice, racists, or I guess anybody who could be deemed a racist, because the bar is it's like calling somebody a Nazi or a fascist or a racist. It's it just means that they don't like you. So it's hard to take that one too seriously, because that's not a very concrete thing anymore. Saying, oh, well, somebody is racially or ethnically motivated. Well, you say that about everybody. So I guess that's to say that, I guess that one is just a catch-all for every single person on the planet who disagrees with the state. You just call them a racist. But additionally, they have animal rights activists. So I guess your PETA types, your tree huggers, the people who go and lay down in front of bulldozers to try and save the trees, people who, frankly, I have respect for. I find it quite depressing to see the clear-cutting of old-growth forests in my area to make way for cookie-cutter garbage, monoculture housing with its hardscape, all of the asphalt and concrete and swimming pools and non-native palm trees and shrubbery and grass that has to be perfectly green 365 days out of the year, or else the homeowners, absolutely, they'll have a brain aneurysm and their head will explode. To see natural beauty just be swept away and burned like trash, to make way for such vapid aspects of humanity. It's sad, really. But if you share my belief, if you feel that way too, congratulations, you're being targeted by the federal government, by the FBI. They're going to try and make their way into your Facebook groups, whatever, tree huggers of Washoe County or whatever your little group is. They'll want to get in there and say, hey guys, why don't we go plant a bomb on one of those bulldozers? That'll teach those real estate developers. And then you go, yeah, that'll learn them. And then guess what? Straight to jail. That's what they want to do to you. They want to exploit your concerns for the environment, for your community, so that they can get a win and say, oh, look, I got another dangerous extremist off the streets. That's all they want to do. It's a game to them. And so they'll target as many people as they can and work as hard as they can to make those folks, to train them into potential criminals and then arrest them for being potential criminals. So now that I got the first three big things out of there, I guess we'll focus on the real meat of the domestic violent extremist checklist or dragnet. We've talked about the environmentalists and the animal rights people. We talked about the racists, which I guess could mean anybody. And we've talked about the pro-life, pro-choice abortionistas of either side. Well, the last thing that is left are the kind of domestic terrorists that I alluded to at the start of the video, and that is your Antifa or Proud Boys, your left or your right generalized domestic terrorists. And they give a pretty detailed description of people who fall into these categories. They say pretty much anyone who's anti-government or anti-hierarchy, or who thinks that corporations are doing bad things, or that globalization is bad, or that the government is oppressive. Anyone who believes any of these sorts of things, anyone who questions powerful people in this country, no matter how you question them, whether you question them as by saying, oh, well, geez, powerful people in this country are racist, or powerful people in this country are just trying to benefit the rich and screw the little guy, or powerful people in this country are are working towards the interests of international corporations, or you just have the very unintelligent and shallow idea that capitalism bad, congratulations, are going to be targeted by the federal government. And so again, I'll give the administration credit. This was not they wrote this in a pretty evenly split way. Every little thing that they listed one thing that applied to the right, they listed another thing that applied to the left, some things that apply to both of them. I mean, being anti-government is something common amongst good patriotic Americans, as it always should be. This country was founded on being anti-government, but it's also common amongst your Antifa types, because they think that the government is controlled by, corporations or capitalism or whatever. And the government is controlled by corporations. They have that right. Or rather, there's a symbiotic relationship. What is the tail and what is the dog is not always clear when it comes to corporations in America, because that is the nature of a corporate state. They are one. There are powerful people in the so-called public sector and the so-called private sector who work in tandem with one another and who share common interests. And because I acknowledge that and oppose it, I am going to be targeted by the federal government. It's kind of funny. I think that everything on this list really applies to me because I think that there's a lot of government overreach, to say the least. So I guess that puts me in with the militia crowd. Particularly, they specifically cite people who are concerned about gun laws. Yeah, that's me. I'm particularly concerned about gun laws. I think that that's a problem. They say, people who are anti-government or who question the hierarchies, whether they be racial or social or whatever. Well, I do that because I think that there is a very coercive hierarchy in this country of powerful people who use violence by means of the state, because the state is violence, make no mistake about that, in order to maintain their position in society. And so right there, I fall into both the right-wing militia and the Antifa categories that are set up here by the feds. I'm concerned about our environment, and I think that it's a problem. Where in parts of the country, it's not a big deal because there's lots of space. But Florida's pretty densely populated at this point. It's hard to drive for an hour or two without seeing brand new construction. And so, yeah, that's something that concerns me. I am pro-life. I am concerned that babies are being murdered in the womb. I think that whoever the authority is that is enforcing the laws, wink, wink, should do more to protect the unborn. So I fall into that category. And what was the last thing? Oh, racism. Well, everybody's a racist, we're told. And if I, as a white man, say I'm not racist, well, that just proves how much more racist I am. So I guess I fall into the racist category, too. And so at any given moment, I could have, maybe 4 or 5 different, divisions or offices within the federal government or the FBI. I don't know if this is just the FBI or if it's across the federal government, how many different agencies are participating. But whoever is in charge of targeting each one of these groups that are specifically cited in this now unclassified document, well, they're all going to have to try and spy on me at once and try to entrap me. And I have to say, they've got their work cut out for them because this is a very broad list. They are, looking to target, I think, millions of Americans. But I guess that just makes it easier for them because, it gives them more people who they can potentially entrap. Maybe if they talk to somebody for a while and they say, you know what, I'm not really interested in blowing up buildings. I think I'm pretty mentally stable and I'm going to try and achieve my goals through other means. They might just move on instead of trying to really prod at you because they're targeting such a narrow portion of the population. They'll just look for crazy people or people who are a little unbalanced and exploit them because, odds are, there's a lot of crazy people in this country. Odds are they've all got to believe at least one of these things. And so all the FBI needs to do is every once in a while they find one crazy guy who happens to believe one of these things, and they gin that guy up into a tizzy. They give him a bomb and then let him go blow up a federal building or what have you, or blow up an aquarium, or blow up a zoo, or blow up I don't know, an unemployment office because they think that the welfare state is out of control, or blow up an abortion clinic, one of these things. Maybe blow up an Amazon fulfillment center because they're an Antifa type. So at the end of the day, I think that's probably what this is about. This is just giving the FBI an excuse to target more and more people in their entrapment operations. They must have gotten bored with the narrow, with the more narrow focus that they might have had before. And I guess the feds generally just don't want people who believe in really anything. They want good cubicle workers who watch CNN and don't really care much one way or another about things. They don't want you to care too much about the environment. They don't want you to care too much about abortion. They don't want you to care too much about guns. They don't want you to care too much about being either against racism or for racism. They don't want you to be too pro-capitalist or too anti-capitalist. They just want you to be wherever, the neoliberal corporate establishment tells you you need to be at any given time. And if you have any unique opinion of your own that you didn't get from the telescreen, that's a problem, and you will likely be targeted. So that's all for today's warning. I guess I'll see you folks back here tomorrow, where hopefully I will be getting more into reverse repo, but this came up yesterday, and I wanted to be able to talk about it because I think that this is a very important issue and probably more pressing time-wise than reverse repo is.